images, you see a skull, a human skull, a small human skull.
I was never closer than 20 to 30 feet from the object, and I did see something that appeared to me to look like something of that nature. Yes, sir.
Crunk says he called authorities several times by way of dispatch and a crime line to report a suspicious find while relieving himself in August 2008.
Hi, sweetie. Hi, Mom. How are you feeling? We're not doing well, kids. None of us. Dad's blown up at the media. Yeah, I heard. Well, someone just said that Caylee was dead this morning, that she drowned in the pool. That's the newest story out there. Surprise, surprise.
And bent over in grief. A newly released prison video shows a grainy image of Caylee Anthony as she learned a child's body had been discovered in a swamp near her parents' Orlando home. In 3 months since Anthony's release, she's become a different kind of prisoner, forced into hiding due to threats from a public that largely believes she was guilty. And though cleared of murder, Anthony's legal troubles are far from over.
How could a mother go out partying all night and get a beautiful life tattoo while the body of her 2-year-old daughter was decomposing in a swamp less than a mile from home? In 2008, America was rocked by the disappearance of little Caylee Anthony. But what ignited absolute global outrage was not just the tragic death of a child, but the sickening web of lies spun by her own mother, Caylee Anthony. This is not simply a murder case. This is the most perfect act of psychological manipulation in judicial history, where justice was blindfolded by lies. How do you measure a mother's love? For most, it is a fierce, unyielding instinct to protect. But in the summer of 2008, the world witnessed an entirely different, chilling metric. At the heart of the Anthony family was Caylee, a bright, beautiful 2-year-old girl who was the absolute center of her grandparents' universe. That loving universe was shattered when her 22-year-old mother, Caylee Anthony, abruptly left the family home, with the toddler in tow, claiming she was on a business trip. Caylee vanished. For weeks, George and Cindy Anthony begged to see their granddaughter. Each time, Caylee fed them an elaborate web of excuses. What happened next is a descent into a sick, unfathomable reality. For 31 agonizing days, Caylee was entirely unaccounted for. Yet, while any normal parent would be tearing the world apart, paralyzed by the terror of a missing child, Caylee was busy crafting her idea of a perfect life. In the dark shadow of her daughter's disappearance, the young mother moved in with a new boyfriend. She spent her days shopping, getting a new back tattoo, entering a hot body contest at a local nightclub, and partying relentlessly into the early morning hours. Not once did she exhibit a shred of panic. Not once did she pick up a phone to alert the authorities. It was a 31-day masterclass in cold, calculating apathy. The sickening truth only began to surface through a twisted stroke of fate. In mid-July, George Anthony received a notice that the car he had lent his daughter had been abandoned and towed to an impound lot. When George arrived to retrieve the vehicle, he was hit by a physical wall of horror. Having previously worked in law enforcement, he instantly recognized the overpowering putrid stench seeping from the trunk. It was the unmistakable, lingering scent of human decomposition. Inside the dark trunk, amid scattered pieces of trash, lay Caylee's favorite toy bag. This nightmare culminated in a 911 call that remains one of the most disturbing recordings in true crime history. A stark, horrifying contrast between a grandmother's absolute despair and a mother's chilling detachment.
Hi. Well, can you tell me what's going on a little bit? I'm sorry? Can you tell me a little bit what's going on? My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days. And you know who has her? I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute. Okay, did you guys call and report a vehicle stolen? Yes. And you last saw her a month ago? 31 days. From 31 days. Who has her? Do you have a name? Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Who is that? Babysitter? She's been my nanny for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years. And why are you calling now? Why didn't you call 31 days ago? I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her, which is stupid. Okay. Can you give me the name of the nanny again? Like, spell it out for me? Zenaida, Z-E-N.
When Casey finally took the phone, the air in the room seemed to freeze completely. I've been looking for her myself. I was just afraid that if I called the police, Zenaida would hurt her.
I lied. But no one asked.
The human brain is
why.
biologically hardwired to panic when a child is in danger. But what happens when a mother's mind is entirely devoid of that fundamental empathy? As the police launched a frantic, full-scale investigation into the disappearance of 2-year-old Caylee, they found themselves not on a rescue mission, but trapped inside the twisted sociopathic labyrinth of Caylee Anthony's mind. When first questioned by seasoned detectives, Casey did not hesitate. She didn't stumble over her words, avoid eye contact, or break down in the hysterical tears of a grieving mother. Instead, she coolly constructed a flawless, hyper-detailed narrative. She provided the investigators with the exact identity of the alleged kidnapper, a nanny named Zenaida Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez. She recounted the specific apartment complex where Zanny lived, detailed her working hours, and confidently named the mutual co-worker who had introduced them years ago. It was a story so meticulously layered with intricate specifics that it seemed impossible to fabricate on the spot. But the illusion shattered the moment law enforcement attempted to verify her claims. Detectives rushed to the apartment where Casey insisted she dropped Caylee off every single morning. The landlord met them with a baffling truth. The unit had been completely vacant for over 5 months, and no one named Zenaida had ever lived on the property. The web of deceit unraveled further when police interrogated Casey's closest circle of friends. A chilling reality emerged: not a single person in her life had ever heard of a nanny. Caylee was always by her mother's side. The elaborate abduction story was nothing but a ghost. The absolute climax of this psychological manipulation occurred the following morning. In a move that continues to baffle criminal behaviorists today, Casey voluntarily offered to lead 3 veteran detectives to her office at Universal Studios to speak with the coworkers she claimed were involved. For 25 excruciating minutes, she confidently marched the investigators past tourists and through winding corridors. She led them deep into an administrative building, marching down a long hallway until they finally reached a dead end with nowhere left to go.
Okay. To an office that you don't have. We got all the way into the building, into the hallway out here before you finally says, well, I really don't have an office here. But up till then, we were walking to your office, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, does any of this make sense to you?
I understand how all of that sounds.
No. Here's the problem with that, though. Here's the problem with that, okay? You can carry the weight of this around for a long time. It's not going to get any easier, okay? What he's trying to tell you right now, I'm going to tell you, you know, in the amount of time that I've done this, almost 30 years now, okay? I've learned this. People make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. All the 3 of us have all made some mistakes in our lives. We've done some things we're not proud of, okay? But then there comes a point in time, you either own up to it, you say you're sorry, you try to get past it, or you lie about it, you bury it, and you lie about it, you bury it, and you lie about it, you bury it, and it just never, ever, 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 ever goes away.
This wasn't a desperate lie born out of fear or panic. It was the calculated, effortless performance of a pathological liar. It laid bare a terrifying sociopathic nature, a woman who would rather lead police on a theatrical wild goose chase than save her own flesh and blood. For 5 grueling months, the desperate search for Caylee Anthony captivated and horrified the globe. The investigation quickly devolved into a suffocating national media circus, with massive search parties scouring the state and the public clinging to the fragile, fading hope that the 2-year-old might still be found alive. But the tragic truth wasn't hidden in some distant city or with a phantom nanny. It was waiting in the murky, snake-infested waters of a wooded swamp on Suburban Drive, less than a single mile away from the very bed where the toddler used to safely sleep. In December 2008, the agonizing mystery finally broke, though not through the efforts of a multi-million-dollar police task force. It was a local utility meter reader, Roy Kronk, who stumbled upon a suspicious submerged gray trash bag in the desolate woods. Kronk had actually reported the foul-smelling bag multiple times over the preceding months, but his urgent warnings were tragically brushed aside by law enforcement. It wasn't until his final, desperate phone call that the horrifying reality could no longer be ignored.
One of the trees was a gray vinyl-like bag, like a pool cover or something like that. And it looked rather suspicious. I didn't touch anything.
2 deputies responded to the area in mid-August but found nothing. It wasn't until months later, on December 13th, that Crunk called 911 after a gruesome discovery.
I was standing behind it, so I was looking at it from behind, and I still didn't think it was real. So I very gently took it and put it into the right eye socket, and I gently pivoted it up, and I looked down, and I realized what it was, and I set it down as gently as I could and went up and called my area supervisor.
Deputies would later uncover tiny bones next to that tiny skull, tossed away like trash in garbage bags.
When crime scene investigators finally waded into the dark muck, the absolute horror of the physical evidence brought seasoned detectives to tears. Inside the rotting canvas bag, the skeletal remains of little Caylee were found heartbreakingly swaddled in her favorite Winnie the Pooh blanket, a stark, agonizing contrast between childhood innocence and absolute evil. But the most chilling, damning detail of all was the piece of silver duct tape still clinging to the toddler's decomposed skull, positioned directly over where her small mouth and nose had once been. This gruesome discovery was the final, devastating puzzle piece that connected a terrifying trail of digital and physical evidence. Forensics had already isolated a single strand of hair in the trunk of Casey's car, exhibiting root banding, a microscopic phenomenon that exclusively occurs when hair falls from a decomposing corpse. Furthermore, computer forensics unveiled a deeply sinister digital footprint. In the days immediately leading up to Caylee's disappearance, someone on Casey's computer had actively scoured the internet, searching for how to make chloroform and researching clinical methods for foolproof suffocation. It yielded the darkest, most terrifying evidence of a meticulously researched and cold-blooded murder. As the horrifying details of Caylee's demise seeped into the public consciousness, the tragedy quickly mutated into a ferocious, unprecedented media circus. The trial of Caylee Anthony wasn't just a legal proceeding. It became a global obsession, broadcasted live to millions of outraged viewers around the clock. News anchors practically screamed her name from their desks, and protesters lined the streets outside the Orange County Courthouse, wielding signs demanding brutal justice. Almost overnight, Caylee was universally branded with a grim, inescapable title, the most hated woman in America. The sheer scale of the public vitriol created a logistical nightmare for the justice system. The hatred was so visceral, so widespread, that finding an impartial jury locally was deemed entirely impossible. To ensure a fair trial, the judge was forced to take extreme measures, importing 12 jurors from a completely different county and strictly isolating them. For 6 grueling weeks, these men and women were entirely sequestered, locked away in a hotel, stripped of their cell phones, their television access heavily monitored, and completely cut off from the outside world. They were thrust into a vacuum, tasked with deciding the fate of a woman the entire country had already convicted in the court of public opinion. When the trial finally commenced, the prosecution wasted no time painting a chilling, uncompromising portrait of the defendant. They didn't just argue how Caylee died, they meticulously unraveled why. The state presented a motive so profoundly selfish and cruel that it defied the very essence of human nature, let alone motherhood. According to the lead prosecutors, Caylee Anthony did not view her vibrant 2-year-old daughter as a blessing to be cherished. Instead, Caylee was a tether and inconvenient heavy burden standing between a narcissistic 22-year-old girl and her desperate desire for absolute, unchecked freedom. The prosecution argued that Caylee was intoxicated by the allure of the Orlando nightlife, infatuated with a new club promoter boyfriend, and desperate to live out the Italian phrase she had freshly tattooed on her shoulder while her child lay dead in a swamp. Bella Vita, the beautiful life. They posited that the murder wasn't a tragic accident or a fleeting moment of panic. It was a cold, calculated execution. In the eyes of the state, Caylee deliberately suffocated her own flesh and blood, trading her child's life for endless nights of drinking, dancing, and reckless abandon. Because of the sickening premeditation and the sheer callousness of dumping her child in the woods like garbage, the state declared they would not settle for mere prison time. They looked the jury dead in the eye and demanded the ultimate irrevocable punishment, the death penalty. If you are captivated by the dark psychology behind cases like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Crime Evidence, we dissect the most twisted minds in criminal history to bring you unparalleled deep dive analyses. Don't miss Part 5, where we expose the shocking courtroom twist that changed everything. The prosecution had seemingly built an airtight case backed by a mountain of circumstantial evidence, digital footprints, and the undeniable stench of death. Facing what many legal analysts considered an impossible, unwinnable battle was defense attorney Jose Baez. Baez knew that attempting to simply deny the physical evidence, the chloroform searches, the root-banded hair, the lies to the police would be a fatal error. Instead of fighting the state on their own terms, Baez unleashed a courtroom bombshell that sent shockwaves through the nation. He didn't just deny the murder, he entirely rewrote the narrative, deploying a psychological masterstroke deliberately designed to fracture the jury's certainty. When Baez stood before the sequestered jury to deliver his opening statement, he dropped a staggering revelation that paralyzed the courtroom. Caylee was never missing. He posited a deeply unsettling conspiracy theory that flipped the entire premise of the trial upside down. According to the defense team, there was no premeditated murder, no homemade chloroform, and no brutal suffocation. Instead, on the morning of June 16, 2008, little Caylee slipped out of the house, fell into the family's backyard swimming pool, and tragically drowned. It was framed as a heartbreaking freak accident, but an accidental drowning alone could not explain the rotting body in the swamp or the duct tape across the child's skull. For that, Baez needed a scapegoat. To make the twisted puzzle pieces fit, the defense aimed their crosshairs directly at the grieving grandfather, George Anthony. Baez claimed it was George, a former law enforcement officer, who discovered Caylee's lifeless body floating in the water. Panic-stricken, enraged, and terrified that Casey would be sent to prison for child neglect, George allegedly took matters into his own hands. According to this shocking narrative, it was the grandfather who hid the truth, wrapped the child's body, applied the duct tape to stage a sinister kidnapping, and ultimately dumped his own granddaughter in the nearby swamp. But a glaring question remained. How could Baez explain Casey's bizarre, cold-blooded behavior? How could he justify her 31 days of relentless partying, her endless web of lies to detectives, and her chilling lack of maternal emotion? To answer this, Baez unleashed the darkest, most treacherous twist of the entire proceeding. He publicly accused George Anthony of severely sexually abusing Casey since she was just 8 years old. The defense painted a grim, suffocating picture of a household built on dark, unspeakable secrets. Baez argued that enduring years of horrific trauma had fundamentally broken Casey's psyche, forcing her to develop a deeply ingrained psychological defense mechanism. The defense claimed that since childhood, Casey had been conditioned by her abuser to suppress her trauma, to smile through immense pain, and to compulsively lie to maintain the illusion of a perfect, happy family. When Caylee allegedly drowned, Casey simply reverted to her lifelong coping mechanism. She retreated into a dissociative fantasy world, acting as though nothing had happened because confronting the horrific reality and her abusive father was psychologically impossible. She partied and lied not because she was a sociopathic killer, but because she was a severely traumatized victim operating on autopilot. This ruthless courtroom strategy effectively put George Anthony on trial alongside his daughter. The world watched in stunned silence as a devastated grandfather, already broken by the horrific loss of his beloved Caylee, and a recent suicide attempt was publicly annihilated on the witness stand. He vehemently denied the vile allegations, his face etched with absolute soul-crushing despair as his own daughter sat feet away. Yet the damage was already done. The defense had successfully weaponized familial trauma, transforming the trial from a pursuit of justice into a toxic, chaotic spectacle of doubt and destruction. After 6 grueling weeks of highly emotional, deeply disturbing testimony, the fate of Caylee Anthony finally rested in the hands of 12 exhausted sequestered jurors. The prosecution had meticulously constructed a morally infuriating narrative, backed by a staggering mountain of circumstantial evidence, suspicious digital footprints, and the undeniable scent of human decomposition. However, the American justice system hinges entirely on one absolute unforgiving pillar: the burden of proof. And it was here that the prosecution's seemingly airtight case harbored a fatal, unavoidable flaw. While the state could definitively prove that Casey was a pathological liar, a callous mother, and a woman who ruthlessly partied while her daughter was missing, they lacked the most critical element required for a homicide conviction: a definitive, medically proven cause of death, because little Caylee's remains had been left to rot in the unforgiving watery muck of a Florida swamp for nearly 6 months. Nature had effectively destroyed the evidence. The medical examiner could only rule the tragic death a homicide by undetermined means. Without soft tissue, there was no conclusive scientific proof of chloroform use, no definitive sign of suffocation, and no direct physical evidence placing Casey's hands on the murder weapon. The prosecution was asking the jury to bridge the gap with logic and common sense. But legally, the gap was vast. Defense attorney Jose Baez recognized this scientific void and masterfully exploited it. He understood that he didn't actually need to prove that Caylee accidentally drowned in the family pool, nor did he need to prove the horrific allegations he waged against George Anthony. His only objective was to plant a lingering seed of hesitation. In a criminal court, a defendant must be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Baez hammered this legal standard into the jury's minds relentlessly, arguing that if the state could not definitively prove how the child died, it was legally and morally impossible to sentence her mother to death. The jury, completely isolated from the public's furious consensus and confined strictly to the letter of the law, stepped right into Baez's psychological trap. The chaotic alternative theories, combined with the lack of direct forensic evidence, created the exact threshold of reasonable doubt needed to dismantle the prosecution's entire case. On the afternoon of July 5, 2011, a suffocating tension blanketed the Orlando courtroom. Millions around the globe were glued to their television screens, bracing for a swift and severe conviction. As the clerk stood to read the verdicts, the unthinkable happened. Count 1, first-degree murder, not guilty. Count 2, aggravated child abuse, not guilty. Inside the courtroom, Caylee Anthony gasped, her shoulders shaking as she wept tears of overwhelming relief. The prosecutors sat frozen, their faces etched in sheer disbelief, while investigating officers stormed out of the room in disgust. But outside the courthouse walls, the reaction was instantly explosive. As the acquittals echoed across the nation, the massive crowd gathered on the streets erupted into absolute, unbridled fury. Chants of justice for Caylee and deafening angry boos pierced the air. The globe watched in collective horror and outrage, fundamentally convinced they had just witnessed a mother literally get away with murder. The shocking acquittal of Caylee Anthony did not merely break the hearts of millions. It fundamentally shattered the public's faith in the American judicial system. However, the collective fury of a traumatized watching nation demanded that Caylee's tragic, painfully short life ignite some form of meaningful, lasting change. In the immediate wake of the devastating verdict, an eruption of public outrage birthed a fierce legislative movement. The powerful result was Caylee's Law, a vital piece of legislation enacted across multiple states that officially made it a felony offense for a parent or legal guardian to fail to report a missing or deceased child in a timely manner. While the stroke of a governor's pen could never bring the vibrant 2-year-old back to life, the law stood as a solemn, enduring vow to the country. It ensured that no mother would ever again be allowed to legally mask the disappearance of her child behind a 31-day wall of deafening silence and cold apathy. Despite facing unprecedented global condemnation, Caylee Anthony walked out of the Orange County Jail just 10 short days after the verdict was read. She had only been convicted of 4 minor misdemeanor counts for providing false information to law enforcement, and with credit for the 3 years she had already served awaiting trial, she was thrust back into the free world. Stepping out into the blinding Florida sun under heavy police escort, Caylee quickly set about erasing the remnants of her shattered past. She permanently severed all communication with her family, leaving behind the very parents whose lives, minds, and reputations had been thoroughly destroyed to secure her freedom. In a heavily symbolic, almost mocking gesture, she eventually covered her infamous Bella Vita shoulder tattoo with a large floral mandala, attempting to bury the visual reminder of the nights she spent partying while her child lay dead. Yet, in a bizarre and deeply unsettling twist of fate, she did not retreat into complete obscurity. Caylee remained freely in South Florida, eventually finding a comfortable living working as an investigative assistant for Patrick McKenna, the very same private investigator who had served as the lead on her own defense team. Living without a shred of visible remorse, she casually insists in rare media appearances that she sleeps perfectly well at night. As the dust finally settles on what was dubbed the trial of the century, The Caylee Anthony case remains a chilling historical testament to the impotence of the legal system when confronted with the dark artistry of manipulation. The rigid architecture of criminal law, built on the absolute necessity of physical proof, was masterfully bypassed by a pathological liar who understood that a well-crafted shadow of doubt is far more powerful than the blinding light of truth. In a courtroom where the most crucial physical evidence was left to rot away in a swamp, justice was ultimately rendered blindfolded, bound, and gagged by courtroom theatrics. The deepest, most agonizing pain of this tragedy does not belong to the woman who effortlessly walked free. It belongs to a completely shattered grandfather, a man who once tried to end his own life because he could not bear the suffocating weight of the monstrous fabricated accusations hurled at him to save his daughter's skin. But above all, the eternal tragedy belongs to little Caylee Marie Anthony. The ultimate truth of what truly happened on that fateful summer afternoon remains hopelessly trapped in a dark, impenetrable void suspended forever between a 2-year-old child who can no longer speak and a mother who will never stop lying.